conference will now be recorded.
And now we're on being recorded. Josh, you want to call the roll? We're all here, I guess.
You're muted, Jeff.
Josh, you're muted.
I know he is.
Andrew Bobbitt,
Here.
Terry Bugenhagen,
Here.
Jalen Stratton,
Here.
Judy Pelletier,
Here.
Phil Spolnick,
Here.
Nick Cutler.
Okay, we have a quorum. Past action review for the Planning Commission. Staff?
We really don't have much to report because our past action, as you know, was our meeting on the 9th where we were doing a dry run to prepare for tonight. So we had an opportunity to talk about some planning procedures. We tested that technology, and for the most part, it looks like the meeting on the 9th was successful because we've got a quorum tonight and we got enough people participating. So I think we can move on.
Okay, and I wanted to thank again the staff for putting that together. That was very successful. Next on our agenda is election of officers. As you know, Dick Johnson has had to leave, and so we have some vacancies. We need to fill the chair and the vice chair. And I have, as former vice chair, I volunteered to go ahead and do chair if anyone would like that, or accept
I will nominate you, Andra, as chair.
Thank you, Judy.
And I will second this Terry.
Okay. And
So Josh, you got that right? The motion was made by Judy and seconded by Terry.
Yes.
Thank you.
okay, all those in favor? I'm trying to do this electronically. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, abstain. Okay, next I need a motion for somebody to assume the position of vice chair. Are there any volunteers or anyone would like to volunteer somebody else?
This is Terry. Happy to take it on.
All right, Terry. I'll second that. I'll actually put that as a motion.
We need a second then, right?
And then we need a second. Yeah.
I'll second.
Judy, second. Okay. All those in favor of Terry as vice chair, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Abstain? Congratulations, Terry. All right.
Whoopee.
And you won't be waiting on the certification. You're it. You know. No honeymoon period. No waiting for all this other stuff, right?
Right. So we'll start off with a bang here. Next on our agenda is a quasi-judicial hearing, case file 20-C-PC-20. The applicant is Georgia Pacific Toledo LLC. They are requesting a conditional use permit to increase the size of their existing landfill at 301 South Bay Road. The purpose is to provide for the disposal of dewatered sludge, which will be removed from the adjacent wastewater sludge pond. The following criteria from Chapter 1 of the Lincoln County Code applicable to the subject request are Section 1.1373, subsection 3, additional conditional uses permitted that are subject to OAR 660-033-0130, subsection 5, Section 1.1373, subsection 7, requirements for conditional uses subject to OAR 660-033-0130, subsection 5, Section 1.1630, subsection 1, conditional use general standards, and finally, Section 1.1630, subsection 10, standards for solid waste disposal site. Testimony should be directed to these criteria or other standards in the Lincoln County Code, state statute, or administrative rule which a party believes applies to the subject request. Failure to raise an issue in this hearing accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the commission an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the Land Use Board's appeals on that issue. Application materials and other evidence relied upon the applicant have been provided to the planning department and made available to the public. Okay. Have there been any ex parte contacts, bias, or conflicts of interest for any planning commission members?
Well,
No.
I don't really have a bias or an ex parte contact or a conflict of interest, but I will say that I am at the dog park overlooking Butler Bridge regularly and frequently go across the Butler Bridge on the Bay Road to the Toledo port for boat launch. So I'm familiar with the area.
Okay,
Familiar with
and
it.
for the record, probably state your name.
Judy Pelletier.
Okay. Did I see another person? Okay. And I assume your bias or contact familiarity with the site, you still feel you can render an opinion, fair opinion on this.
I believe so, yes.
Great.
Yeah, this is Jerry Herbie. So yeah, you know, the standard, you've been with the Planning Commission a long time, is whether you can listen to or take in this case, the evidence, look at the decision criteria and make a decision based upon that.
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Judy.
Mhm.
As you all are aware, or hopefully are aware, that the applicant has requested, made a request to continue the hearing to January 11th, 2021. At this time, I would entertain a motion authorizing that, if anyone so desires.
Well, I'll make a motion that we continue the hearing on January 11th, 2021.
As requested by the applicant, yes? Affirm your motion?
As
I would
requested
second
by the
Jerry.
applicant.
Okay, do I hear a second on that?
I'll
Yes, Terry.
Okay. Who seconded? Terry seconded that or Judy? Okay,
Yes.
I'm not having problems hearing Terry just a little bit, I think. But you're
Okay.
not-
I was
Judy
fine
made
with
the
that.
motion and Terry seconded.
Great, okay. All those in favor of continuing the hearing to January 11th, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Abstained? None. Okay, motion carries. At this point, we're going to have the staff summarize now the procedure for the rest of this e-hearing for this evening.
Thank
Who's
you.
gonna take it away?
For the record, I'm Jerry Herbage. If you're looking at the thing, it says Michael Herbage, but I'm actually Jerry, but just for purposes of Lincoln County, I have to be Michael. But anyway, I'm an assistant county counsel for Lincoln County, and I'd like to briefly talk about the procedure, and thank you, Chair, for giving me this opportunity. So we all know that we live in the COVID world. And pre-COVID, we know how, most people know how our meetings would work. We would meet in the large conference room there, and in the courthouse, the public would be able to submit written materials, but also appear in person and to be called upon, everybody getting a chance during the proceeding to provide testimony. And we live now in the COVID world, so we can't do what we did in the pre-COVID world. And the legislature recognized that. So the legislature passed House Bill 4212, and it allows for hearings such as we're conducting tonight, without meeting, for instance, in a given room, and for direct audience participation. The rule and what the law requires is that the meeting be live streamed, and that the public and interested parties have the right to submit written materials, and that the decision makers then would review those materials in making their decision. There are variations to this, but we're using the written materials form. So to all of those who may be listening, we're having what we call a virtual meeting today. There is going to be no live testimony from the parties. We are not meeting in a room. We're doing this via it's a go-to meeting, and like many people are doing during this COVID time. So in terms of the procedure, what I expect that will happen is very shortly the staff will go over the staff report. And when they are done, if any of the Planning Commission members have questions that they would like to direct to the parties, either the applicant or other parties, then we'll poll those commissioners to see what the questions are. We'll put them in writing and send them out so people know what the questions are. We are going to reconvene on January 11th, 2021. As part of this proceeding, before we get there, we know that there'll be at least a 7-day period after today's proceeding for people to submit additional materials. And the rules about continuances and leave the record open remain in effect under ORS 197-763. What I'd like to tell the Planning Commission members is, first of all, thank you very much for being here tonight. It's an important job. And what I would ask you to do is listen carefully to the presentation of the staff report. Think of any questions that you might have. And then by all means, please do not deliberate in any way towards a decision tonight. That won't happen tonight. And we're interested in the Fasano type fair hearing. So don't weigh the proposal, in a sense, or express, what I'm trying to say is don't express approval or disapproval tonight. You can ask questions or present questions to the staff, but avoid anything that looks like deliberation. And I would like to turn to John and Ano and just say if there's anything else that you would like to add regarding the procedure.
Just for, because Phil wasn't part of our last meeting, I think what starts to sound, just a reminder, what starts to sound like deliberation is if a planning commission, if you're gonna ask questions of staff, which we encourage you to do, or openly ask questions that then go into the record that can be shared with the applicant. Please refrain from responding to your other commissioners in terms of, because that's what really and many of us have been in deliberations and we love deliberations. Deliberations are great, but under even normal circumstances, that kind of back and forth among you guys asking each other about what you're thinking and why is really reserved to that is truly deliberation when you're engaging each other. So if we really want to have this opportunity, and I think it's advantageous to the applicant to hear what you're thinking and what your questions are now, because as those of you that have been part of this for a long time understand that normally we give the staff presentation, you'd ask us questions, so that's normal. What's different here is that we don't have an applicant coming to you live. Where they would give their pitch, and then you would be actually asking them questions. So of course, tonight, as you know, they've asked for a continuance anyway. But that's what really what we mean by deliberations.
Okay, does anyone have any need anything clarified on that? I mean, it's also the applicant gets to look at these questions, but also the general public. They still have an opportunity after that January 11th meeting to respond to the material they're hearing and our questions as well. So just to be clear. And with that, I think I don't see any questions, so I believe we're ready for the staff report.
All right, thank you, Chair Bobbitt. First, just if anybody can't hear me for any reason, please just speak up or say something or wave your arms or whatever. So as Chair Bobbitt already explained, this is a request by Georgia Pacific to expand their existing landfill to house, permanently store material from these sludge ponds that are adjacent to the landfill. The property itself is zoned agricultural conservation, it's AC. In that zone, a landfill is a use that is allowed conditionally. So this landfill that exists there today, it predated our zoning. It was established sometime after 1958. So it's there's a nonconformity to it, but technically it's not really a nonconforming use. It's an allowed use in the zone, and the use predates our zoning, so we never permitted it originally, but it can be permitted now, and the expansion can be permitted, under the zoning. That said, it's a conditional use. Conditional use criteria apply, and so in the evaluation of this application, you're going to have to, observe these criteria and see how their application addresses those criteria. The property location, as you know, is along the Uquina River. It's just immediately south of Toledo. The property itself is all owned by Georgia Pacific. That landfill is used exclusively by Georgia Pacific. It is not a public landfill. It's not operated. It's not open to the public, and only material that Georgia Pacific generates is placed into the landfill. The background. Just a couple other relevant facts to the use. In my staff report, you'll note that we discussed the zoning plan designation. There are no existing structures on the property. We mentioned the surrounding uses, the surrounding zoning, which there's plenty of different zoning. There's immediately adjacent to the site, you'll find rural residential zoned land with existing residential uses that are to the south and west of the site. Toledo is immediately to the north. In Toledo, you'll have various urban uses, including higher density residential uses across the river. There's a kind of a little bit of agricultural use to the southeast, and some marine industrial zoned area, although I don't think there are any particular marine uses right now, immediately to the north and west. The topography of the vegetation on the site is trees, timber, brush. The actual site itself is pretty much stripped of vegetation. It's been altered significantly over the decades, so nothing surprising there. There is power to the site, but there's no other utilities. There's no water. There's no septic, nothing like that, which all that makes sense. Development constraints include hazards that are associated with the site. The site is in the special flood hazard area. It's in the AE flood zone. This particular site has, it's located before the floodway. It's affected by tidal action. And so there's some kind of unique floodplain development requirements associated with the site. I'll briefly touch on those. The site is also susceptible to landslides, earthquakes. It has a moderate liquefaction hazard associated with it. This information is all available through the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, NAMI. This is documented information, and it's fairly well studied. So we know these hazards exist. The background of this, I'll be brief. I actually provided quite a bit of detail in the report so everybody could understand what material we're talking about. These sludge ponds are part of GP's wastewater treatment process. The material in the sludge pond that they want to dewater, basically dry out, stack into this landfill, is the byproduct of decades of pulp treatment or pulp processing, so that they can make this paper that they produce there. So that's what this is. It's wastewater, and it's fairly concentrated stuff. It's not municipal wastewater. There's a difference. This is a pretty specific type of sludge that's generated. I don't really know much about it beyond what the applicants placed in the provided with the application. It's pretty fine-grained stuff, I think. So in the process, GP's primary wastewater treatment facilities are on the north side of the river. They have these 2 8-inch pipes that run under the river, and they transport material through the pipes, put them in the sludge pond. They go through a process called decanting, where you basically let everything settle. You pump the clear effluent off the top, you bring it back over to the other side of the river, and then GP processes it and dumps it out. I think it goes out in the ocean through an outfall line. So that's kind of the mechanics of it. 35 years of sludge is built up at the bottom of this largest pond of theirs, and they're running out of room. So this is their solution. This is what they propose to do to solve their problem with this sludge is dig it up, dry it out, stack it up on the landfill side of their property. The primary, I'm going to mention the agency comments. We did solicit for agency comments on this application. There's a number of agencies that have to oversee this project if it's going to be permitted. It's not just Lincoln County. Relevant agency here is DEQ. Oregon DEQ licenses this landfill that GP operates. So in order to expand the landfill, GP is going to be going back to DEQ and getting a revised or a new permit. I'm not really clear on which. It doesn't really matter. The truth is they're just going to get another permit from DEQ for this larger landfill. My understanding based on the application is that they also feel they're probably going to need some kind of permission through Oregon Department of State Lands, DSL. They regulate anything that basically involves state water, and also U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That's usually a joint permit application. So GP thinks that they're going to be applying for that permit, but no reason that they don't need it. So that's probably what's going to happen. There's other agencies that will be involved in this joint permitting process. So there's at least 2 kind of distinct permits. There's one through DEQ that has to do with the landfill itself, and then there's another permit that's going to be through DSL and U.S. Corps of Engineers. We're doing our permitting first. The primary reason we're doing our permitting first is because these agencies really don't want to process GP's permit applications until they're sure that the land use is compatible and basically approved. So this is going to be the first permitting hurdle that GP gets over. I would also say I don't think there's any reason to believe GP wouldn't be able to get the other permits that they're applying for. Based on their application, they seem to be pretty confident they can do that. So all that being said, we did solicit for comments from these other agencies. Now, I solicited for comments from Paul Seitz, Lincoln County Solid Waste. Because this is a landfill, I wanted to see if he had any comments on it being a landfill. It's not a public landfill, which is really more his thing. But he did provide some comments on it. The technical comments relevant to the actual operation of the landfill. So, we appreciate those comments. Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development provided a pretty detailed comment that's included in the staff report. They touched on a number of things that we also addressed in our staff report, and then DEQ and two notes in there about comments we did not receive. We did not receive any comments from DEQ. They chose not to comment. The other comment we did not receive any, was a comment from Public Works. Typically, any kind of conditional use permit, actually, it's a requirement that the county's conditional use criteria that we solicit comments from the adjacent transportation agency. It's either ODOT or Lincoln County Public Works. In this case, Lincoln County Public Works. They didn't have any comments. They just didn't really feel like there's any issues here. Evaluation of the request. Primarily, we packaged this thing up to present to the Planning Commission for your consideration. Staff's comments relevant to the criteria primarily have to do with the natural hazards. The applicant responded to the criteria relevant to approving any conditional use, which is the 1630 sub 1, the general standards that have to do with conditional use permits. So these are the general standards governing conditional uses. The site under consideration is suitable. These are determinations that have to be made. The site under consideration has to be determined to be suitable for proposed use. The site design operating characteristics of the use have to be adequate. The transportation has to be adequate, and you have to consider the natural physical features of the site, including topography, natural hazards, natural resource values, and other features. The applicant did respond to these criteria. Those responses, I basically include those in the staff report. The primary response, or the primary comment from staff, has to do with the natural hazards associated with the site. Again,
John, do you want to point out that, are you getting to this, or that we wrote a letter of incompleteness to him? Is that coming, or is that, I think that's important to recognize that that was a major part of this, our staff response, is that we sent them, I don't have the date on the top of my head, John, but we sent them a letter of incompleteness asking for more information about the natural hazards. So,
yeah.
And I don't want to steal the thunder here if you're getting to that.
Yeah, I'll get to that. So in the natural hazards associated with this site, there's a special flood hazard area. Again, I mentioned that this is susceptible to flooding. This is within the Cascadia subduction zone, or earthquake zone. So if we do have a Cascadia seismic event, this site is subject to it. Pretty much everything along the Oregon coast is subject to it, but this site is on the Oregon coast, so there you go. It's susceptible to landslides and susceptible to liquefaction associated with earthquakes. So these are hazards that are specifically associated with this site. They need to be considered. To what Anna was saying, initially when we received the application, we did provide, we sent an incomplete letter to the applicant. There's a couple things we needed, and one of them was we needed some response to this criteria. They submitted a additional, basically a supplemental response to the criteria, and with that supplemental response, I also requested that we consider their application complete and go ahead and process it. So we did that. Those are, again, this is 1631. This is the general standards for conditional use permits. There's a specific set of standards for conditional use permits under subsection 10. If you read those conditional use standards, they're kind of engineered for a conventional landfill, something that would be open to the public, something a little bit more business-like. Some of those standards apply clearly to this application. Some of them maybe not so much. Staff's position is if nothing else, this is a similar use, and the standards do actually apply. They're the standards we have to evaluate this request. So I did address those in the staff report, and kind of as a punch list, I kind of mentioned the ones that seem to apply more specifically to this. We can discuss that if you want. I think the applicant generally addressed those standards in the subsection 10. I'm going to go over kind of some specific things that are addressed throughout the criteria. Transportation impacts, not so much. If based on the application that was submitted, there will be transportation impacts. There will be vehicles and stuff that arrive at the site. Some things will happen. Those vehicles will leave, but I don't think these are significant transportation impacts. This is not the same type of transportation impact you would see with a conventional landfill, where you would have trucks coming and going all day long. So I think that's relevant to consider. Debris management, in the sense that things are going to blow around the site. Well, I think that's a thing right now. I think that's what's, they've been, if you read the EQ permit that exists right now, the applicant has the ability to, dispose of, I'd say, conventional, waste in their landfill. They can throw paper and plastic and stuff like that. Apparently they do. Now that's different than what they're proposing. What they're proposing is to put this dehydrated sludge in there, and you're not going to get so much of that blowing around, except you might get dust. That's probably a very reasonable anticipation for this material that they're putting in there. I think they've addressed that in the sense that they're planning on hydroseeding these cells after they put the material in there. It seems like a reasonable solution. I'm not sure what, in terms of the effect of noise and odor, I'm not sure if that's up to you to decide. They've made comments in there. Whether they've addressed it or not, you'll have to decide that later on. I'm not quite sure what the noise impacts would be, although I'll get to this in a minute, but there's apparently an issue with horns or sirens or alarms associated with vehicles that back up. Apparently that's the thing. Something to keep in mind, this is kind of an industrial use. It's clearly an industrial use. It's an industrial site. There's a lot of industrial activity, so it's noisy. So the primary criteria under sub 1, the applicant addressed those. The only thing we really came in and talked about were the hazards. The criteria under sub 10, staff went through, kind of bullet listed those criteria, and the applicant addressed all of the criteria. They made a statement to every criteria. Some things we just didn't comment on. We let the applicant's comments stand in the application itself, and we didn't fill in any blanks or try and address it. All that being said, so far to date, we've received one submittal. It would be a letter in opposition. I emailed that out earlier today. That letter in opposition was from some of the residents in the area. Everybody, if nobody got that, or if nobody else is aware of that, let me know. I did try and email it out to all planning commission members and some staff. So just want to make sure you all receive that today. And then we're going to make sure that gets put on the website, and then the applicant can view that. They may or may not choose to respond to it. Aside from the conditional use criteria that I mentioned, there's a couple things that there's a specific criteria related to conditional uses in agricultural zoning, and that is 1373(3), additional conditional use, or additional conditional uses permitted. They're subject to OAR 66033. 0130 sub 5. And in our code, the criteria states a site for the disposal of solid waste approved by a city or county governing body for which a permit has been granted by the Oregon Department of DEQ under the relevant statute cited, including equipment, facilities, and buildings necessary for its operation. This use is not permitted on high-value farmland except as provided in the subsection. So the issue here is they need to make sure they have a DEQ permit. I think that's addressed. This is not on high-value farmland. I just want to make sure that the planning commission knows we did check. That's not an issue. So this criteria is, as far as we can determine, it's met. The other criteria that is relevant to this for AC, that particular criteria specific to landfill, but there's landfills, but there's another criteria that has to do with requirements for conditional uses subject to OAR 660-33. I got the wrong, I missed a digit in my citation, in my staff report. Same area in the OAR. Anyway, approval of use is subject to the requirements of the subject requires findings that uses A, will not force a significant change in the accepted farm and forest practices in surrounding lands devoted to farm and forest use, and B, will not significantly increase the cost of accepted farm or forest practices on lands devoted to farm and forest use. There's not a lot of functional agricultural land surrounding the site. There's a little bit of timber, there's a little bit of agriculture. The applicant responded to it, and staff really didn't have any comments on the applicant's response. It's just a criteria that requires you to make a finding. If you find or if you determine that this has some significant, this is going to cause a significant change in accepted farm or forest practices, or do something to the value of its properties, that's relevant. So just keep that in mind in your eventual deliberations. That's pretty much it. That's the criteria that's relevant to this application. The primary issue is the question of whether this is suitable for the site. The use that's proposed is suitable to the site, proposed. One of the, I think the way we phrased this in the staff report was, you should probably focus on, is the site under consideration suitable for the use, and is it compatible with the surrounding uses? I think that's the question. I think that you can make those determinations as far as the rest of the criteria. I don't believe there's any other specific criteria that are necessarily a hurdle to the application. There may be a question later on about security, about fencing, about site screening, things like that. When you get to that point, you can talk about that. But at this time, that's pretty much the short, fast summary of the staff report. Does anybody want me to go into any more detail about any particular section, or are there any other questions, about this application of the staff report at this point?
John, this is Jerry. Could I ask you a question? Would that be okay?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So the question to you is, you had mentioned that you had received in the record a submittal in opposition from the residents. I understand you also received the application with the materials and that it was amended when you indicated it was incomplete. Is there anything else in the record at this point?
No, there is nothing else in the record at this point.
Okay. And for those who are following along in this virtual meeting, is this correct? My understanding is that you will be posting, or the office will be posting, those materials that are submitted so that everyone can see what is submitted. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. The additional submittal that we received today, I'm going to try and get that up on the website tomorrow, sometime tomorrow. And everything else is currently on the website.
Thank you, John. That was great. Can I have everyone please check right now? I see one person is not muted and we're getting some background noise. I think Scarlett, it's your thing, and I kept switching. And also if you have a question, unmute, and then I know that you can also wave at me, except for you, Judy, I can't see you. But if you unmute, I know that you will want to ask a question. So at this time, let's open it up for the commissioners to ask staff questions about anything that they have in their report or anything you have received thus far. Is there anyone who would like to go first? Phil?
Yeah, would it be appropriate for us to ask GP to provide us with the chemical composition of the sludge?
You can, if I may. You might also ask them what it means. I mean, I think there was a list in the supplemental response that showed some of the chemicals that were in there. Whatever, I don't know what any of that stuff is. I mean, I know what arsenic and lead and stuff like that, but I don't know what it means in terms of how that.
I'm by no means an expert, but I had 7 years of college, and all 7 years I took all the different chemistry courses. I also worked 6 years for the Idaho Fish and Game Department in water quality. And I'm just curious to see what, you know, you sent me the packet, but it was so large that I only could open part of it. And unfortunately, all my mail here is being forwarded to Kona. So, you know, it'll be there when I get there probably. And so I'll be able to look and see what you have as far as that. But I'm just kind of curious to see what's in that sludge. The other question I have, did anybody ever ask them, why don't you haul this to the valley and the landfill there at north of Corvallis?
They volunteered the answer to that question pretty early on. I think when they evaluated this, the proposed use, the use that they're suggesting, they looked at some alternatives, and one of those alternatives, they made a statement in the application. When you get into it, you'll find it. It's a little buried, but they said something. This material, wet, it's like 700,000 cubic yards. Dry, it's closer to like 500,000 cubic yards. They did the math on how many dump trucks that is, and their comment was something to the effect of this really increases their carbon footprint driving this material to Corvallis, basically. So that was their response. But there is a response in there in the application. I'll email it. I can highlight that later on.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
I have a question.
Judy, can you wait 1 second? Shaylin and Terry also had questions. Shaylin, do you want to go?
Sure.
Well, I've got kind of a list, so of things, information I'd like to request. So if one of the other commissioners has a short question, I'd be glad to wait.
Go ahead. Just go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, there was a lot of information in the applications, but there were some kind of glaring missing parts that I'd like them to address. And I guess probably the first one is that I'd like the applicant to let us know what they think they would be required to do to meet the various state and federal permitting requirements that they haven't talked about in the application or in the supplemental response. That would give us a bit more information about what their process is expected to be. The next thing would be that the applicant has recommended a time frame for working that would run from 8 in the morning until 7 at night, assuming, and I'm assuming a 7-day work week, although they did not mention that. So I would like to know how they intend to conduct their after dark construction operations within those proposed hours. I'd like to know how long the phase 1 construction is expected to take. I don't believe that's mentioned anywhere in their application. It might be in some of the supporting documents, but I haven't seen those yet. I would like to find out if the project area has ever flooded. They don't indicate whether there has ever been a flood on that particular site. So I'd like to know, and if it has, under what were the circumstances that it occurred, and what were the impacts from the flooding? The supplemental, and this kind of goes back to what Phil was asking, the supplemental response that was provided by the applicant gave us a comprehensive listing of the chemical breakdown of their the sludge, but there was very limited discussion as to how those components, what effect they would have on the river's water quality, the fish, wildlife, the use of the river water for irrigation, and any other uses in case this sludge is discharged into the river. It would also be really helpful if the applicant would provide a definition of biosolids and organic as it's used in their application, and the differences between the two in layman's terms, so that we can understand how it relates to this project. I'm almost done. There's a potential for damage to the berm and discharge of the fill as a result of a Cascadia earthquake. We've already talked about that. It has to be considered. Since it appears that the project will be subject to a number of federal permits, I believe it will be necessary for a review under NEPA. And so it would be very helpful if the applicant would provide a copy of the NEPA evaluations, especially the biological, water quality, and cumulative impact portions of those studies, and any proposed mitigation measures. The applicant has indicated that construction may result in increased odor that might impact neighboring properties, and that odor protection would be provided. However, there is no explanation of what that odor protection would entail, and under what circumstances it would be applied. And finally, this was just recently brought up by John, is that the construction has the potential to cause dust that may affect the neighboring properties and anyone on the river. And so the applicant should provide us with an explanation of what dust control they are planning to use if they need to. Those were the main things that I think I'd like to have that information, and I'd like the rest of the commissioners to have that information before we make decision.
All right, I think almost everything on that list was things to be answered by the applicant. I don't know if there's anything in their staff that you wanted to even.
No, I think this has all to do from information that I'm suggesting we would like the applicant to provide.
All right, great, thank you. Terry, you want to go now?
Yeah, I've got a couple items and they kind of dovetail in with Shaylin's. One of them is we talk about this being the smaller pond of the three. And apparently that the two ponds have been there since Hector was a pup, before there were rules. How long is this fix actually going to be applied and be workable? Or is there an increase in production of the craft paper or modified craft paper that's putting additional pressure on the ponds in the disposal process? There's no discussion about project life of the ponds. You know, eventually it's going to fill up like all landfills. So when does that end? The other quick.
I think John has a
Go ahead.
response.
Well, I was just going to say, I think your question is to the applicant. The only thing I would
Yeah.
say, the applicant's indicating that this is I think a 50-year fix, if I understood the application correctly. But they were vague about that. They really were. I don't know if it's really a 50-year fix, if it's just hopefully a 50-year fix. And yeah, I don't know what they do after 50 years.
I kind of get the same feeling, John. Hopefully it's a 50-year fix and we'll all be gone and forgot about it. But I get concerned about it, particularly since the project sites, and using sites because of the other two ponds, are fairly close to a navigable waterway as well as a fishing waterway. And those are two concerns that I have. I know that doesn't apply to our land use criteria per se, but still a concern. They mentioned in the
Commissioner Bugenhagen,
yes,
I may. I think the impact of the river is exactly what the criteria is asking when it's asking you about natural hazards and the compatibility of the project. I think that's directly relevant. That's not. I just want to caution that what
and I don't know if I have an
I don't think
I don't know.
disagree. I disagree with you. I think it's entirely relevant.
Okay. I guess I would be looking more towards DEQ for that assessment. Because that would be materials going into the waterways. And I know from my experience with sanitation equipment, it's pretty strict and getting stricter.
Yeah, I think I'm not, and I want to, if I may, just what Shaylin has said as well is that, you know, it'd be nice to know these things, but what other agencies do is not necessarily directly related to our criteria. So while I think we'd all like to have as much information as possible, and maybe if they get through our process and they actually do this and they go further on and there are these documents, I think they're going to have to address some of these things. But whether it's this is something that you're obligated to address at this very early stage of this process. That's the kind of position you're at. This very important early position to talk about that very issue. I please think of it in terms of your own criteria and not what some other agency may or may not do later on. I just don't think that works for us being able to create findings anchored to somebody else's process and what they may or may not do. Thank you.
Thank you. The other thing that came to mind is in the staff report, it talked about seeding of some of the areas. And my question is, what vegetation is on the existing ponds or adjacent to the existing ponds? And what are they going to seed? Has there been with the existing ponds any experience with liquefaction or experience with discharges into the river, or have they been lucky so far?
John, do you want to? I don't know that we've heard of any discharge. They haven't certainly communicated any discharges. We can turn that into a question. for that? Because I think that's more or less, that would be a question for GP.
I think Commissioner Bugenhagen's questions are questions for GP. The applicant didn't convey any of this information that I was able to discern from the application. Now, I can just tell you, because I'm fairly familiar with the material, buried in the berm, geotechnical report on the berm, they had a table. The Wood Consulting had a table of historical documents they referenced. They developed that. I just happened to glance at it because it was interesting, and there was an event noted. Bear with me for a second.
The 1964,
Yeah.
the 1964 earthquake event is only with the smaller pond in existence, and it survived, or with the 64 flooding event, I believe it was.
Yeah.
It was pre 30-acre pond.
Right. So I don't believe the let's see if I can find that. I don't believe the new pond has even experienced a significant flood event. I don't. There's been 100-year floods since 1985, of course, but I don't think that it didn't experience what the smaller pond experienced in 1964. I didn't see any. There's no indication it was a river discharge or anything like that, but it's a direct question for the applicant. I think the applicant needs to has to answer that question, because we don't know. It would be much better for the applicant to just say yes or no, or they don't know. But I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, Commissioner Buchnager, your questions seem to be directed to the applicant. That's great. That's good. We can get those questions to them, and they can get back to us.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Is that all for you? Okay, so Judy,
My questions
you
were,
ready?
I had two of the same questions that Shaylin mentioned. One was, how long is phase one? And I know the materials say in 10-year increments for 50 years, but we don't know that how long phase one actually, the construction period, will actually run. And how do they intend to contain the odor? They kept mentioning odor control, but I don't know how. So I'm wondering how.
Okay.
As
All
far
right.
as vegetation, I think they do mention that vegetation has been removed in preparation for this. So it was trees and grasses and shrubs and, native invasive stuff, I guess.
Okay.
All right, that's all.
Okay, great. Thank you, Judy. Anyone else have questions, Misty or Scarlett or?
I have a question, and I don't know if it's relevant or not, but when I was looking at assessor's records, it shows that it states there's an improvement there. Does anybody have any idea what that is? Throughout the whole staff report, they always say there is nothing there. But in the assessor's records, it shows that there was something built in 1987 and it's roughly 900 square feet.
There may be a structure there, and I'll apologize. I did not find any indication of it, but I didn't look to see if there were any improvements in the assessor's records. So I'll investigate that. I'll get back to the commission. If I find a structure there, I'll let you know what it is. 900 square feet is not real big. I don't know what that would be.
No, not very big at all, but if it's on AC zoned land, it should be an ag garden, so it'd be interesting to know what it is.
Yeah, go ahead. This is Jerry. I just, in terms of what's there, remember what we want to do is make sure we make a decision on the record and not with independent investigation necessarily from either staff or any of the planning commission members. So I think this exercise has been great, because what will happen is when we're done here, I think staff can put together a list of the questions presented, and it will be answered by the applicant. And I think that's the way to go. The applicant should be the party in the know and should be able to answer the questions. And I think a lot of very good questions have been asked. So I think that this should just be another question to them. What is, if there are any structures, what is, or what is the 900 square foot structure or something? That would just be one of the questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Misty, you want to go, and then Phil, I see you're ready again.
So I have a question on page 5 of the staff report, section 2, Oregon Department of Land, section 2 of that. It says the FEMA map does not recognize these levees that provide flood protection. So what, is there an obstacle in getting FEMA to recognize them, or is there a reason why FEMA would not recognize them?
Yeah, they could be recognized as levies. The applicant would have to go through a kind of a significant process to do that. It's unnecessary for the applicant's purposes. Certified levies are generally meant for protection of basically life protection. If you have a levee and below that levee you've got houses or people who are dwelling below that in what would be ultimately the flood area associated with levee failure, you want those levees to be certified to that standard. For FEMA's or for the applicant's purpose, I don't think GP benefits from going through the process of certifying those levees, or at least I don't think that's ever been an issue before now. It's not necessary for those levies to be certified currently. It really doesn't get them anything, and I'm not sure it's going to really get us anything. I think, and the reason I say that is because the levees that are there now, the berms that are there now, when they had Wood Consultant do an evaluation of those berms, they did evaluate those berms on some of the more mechanical features associated with those, with that levee certification, specifically and I mentioned the 3 in there, the slope stability, the embankment settlement issue, and the seepage issue. Those are the mechanical features to those levees that really tell you that these things are solid, they're going to stay there under normal flooding conditions. The other elements to certifying those levees include alarm systems, certain types of procedural things, operational things associated with levees, things that just probably are not practical for GP and really don't, for instance, alarm systems don't really benefit anything. If that levee, let's say the levee were to fail one way or the other, and keep in mind these levees hold material, they hold the river back on one side and they hold the ponds back on the other. So yes, if the levee fails one direction, you're gonna have the river spilling into the ponds. If it failed the other direction, you'd have what's in the ponds spilling into the river. The alarm system as it's kind of intended under FEMA's regulations, is to protect people, alert people that, hey, there's a levee failure and there's water's coming. Doesn't do any good here. So they could certify those levees. I just don't see that being a practical step for them. However, this is something that's relevant to the Planning Commission. It might be a question you want to direct to the applicant, let them answer in their own terms what, whether they see it as being a benefit or whether they, or what their argument would be one way or the other about certifying those levies. Sorry, it's kind of a staggeringly long answer. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Let me try to take another shot at responding to John's, because John worked so hard on this, and as a team we did this, but the amount of time and energy that John put into this was just incredible. But one of the reasons there's so much information in there about just the national flood insurance, the 100-year regular storm event, is that in our early conversations with Georgia Pacific and with the state agencies and stuff, there was an awful lot of early exhaustive examination to look at that normal 100-year flood event and what did that mean for the project. Because without getting too deeply into the National Flood Insurance Program, we challenged them to make sure that this was a project that could meet the National Flood Insurance because of whether or not it would create changes in the river's height and all this kind of stuff. So what you see in the application is an exhaustive amount of material about the 100-year flood event as a natural hazard. And I think the applicant has provided, a tremendous amount of analysis on that front. And you'll notice in our letter of incompleteness, we sure didn't think that we needed any more information about the 100-year flood event. What we needed information about, which was absent from the original application, was any seismic activity and Cascadia, because that is a fundamental difference between a normal storm and what that's going to do to those earthen berms versus Cascadia, which is going to be like a wildly different phenomenon. So again, I applaud GP in terms of the quality of the work that they did to address and fill out as much information as we were asking for on the 100-year flood event. It's these other events that really triggered our letter of incompleteness. So Misty, it's true. I want to echo what John said, is that I would not be distracted by the fact that they haven't gone ahead and applied for these levees to be certified as somehow an indication that the earthen berms are inadequate for a 100-year flood event. I think they are, in terms from a staff perspective and what they've provided in terms of the engineering. But that was not the central thing that we were asking from a staff perspective when we sent the letter of incompleteness. It was not about the 100-year flood event. It was all about seismic activity and the consequences that would follow from that. So again, I hope we don't, I know we spent a lot of time on that, and given the quality of their responses, I'm not sure that pursuing inquiries on that level will provide that much more information from you in terms of what you really need. Because I think you could easily look at that and say, yeah, well, how come they didn't get the levees certified? Is there something? What's about that? And I think John did a good job of explaining that. We were asking them and pushing them to give us information so we could at least get that national flood insurance and the FEMA program and a 100-year event storm behind us. But it certainly is not any indication that they haven't been certified, that for the 100-year event that those levees that those earthen berms wouldn't perform what they're doing right now for 100-year flood events.
Okay. Phil, did you have another question way back, or has it been answered now?
Like I said, I didn't read the complete manuscript, but was Fish and Wildlife notified, and did they make a comment?
We did not notify Oregon Fish and Wildlife directly, but what typically happens is DSL, they got notified. DSL utilizes Fish and Wildlife through their permitting process. If Fish and Wildlife were going to comment, I would have expected them to comment through DSL or in conjunction with DSL. But no, as far as, they've had, I'm sure they had an opportunity if they looked. They haven't made any comments on it. So
we didn't, but John, it's true that we didn't ask, we didn't pointedly
Right.
send
Correct.
stuff, you know.
Directly, yeah. We didn't send it directly.
Or to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, for that matter,
Right.
or the National Marine Fisheries Service,
Right.
about what their thoughts were going to be.
Right. If they were notified, it would have been through DSL. My understanding is that's typically what happens. Is DSL does that. If I've at least my experience with other conditional use permits, I've contacted DSL, and DSL brought ODF&W on their comments to me. So that's how it's occurred in the past. So.
Okay. Any other commissioners with some further questions? Okay, let me go through my list now. I think everyone I always have questions, but I think most people might have gotten there. So back to the berm levee with regards to a Cascadia landslide, whatever, it's a compatibility issue. Is it possible if we authorize something as a conditional use, is there a way to ask for some kind of protection against these catastrophic events, such as something like, it's not the same thing, but how the Hatfield building new building was built with the tsunami standards. Is there anything in that? Because, it's not the residential, we have the residential compatibility, but we do have the Yaquina River compatibility as a big neighbor to this project because of the fishing industry in our community is huge. So I think that's where maybe Phil's asking about Fish and Wildlife and whatnot. And so is there something there? There was something in the request for their renewal permit, their normal renewal permit, and something in there also about liners and covers and things like that, which is, are any of those, would those make it more compatible with any kind of smell and odor or things like that? And then just a little technicality as far as the, also that supplemental with all that table of items. I'd like to know if those are fish safe chemicals. And it's any guarantee those things are not going to get out in that river. There's so much, it's hard to understand all the seepage and different graphs, all those cross sections. I would like that a little more put into layman's terms, I guess, because it is a compatibility issue with our community. But looking at all the maps on one of them, I kept seeing the new wet pond and that the landfill is going into the 15-acre pond. And so is there any permitting necessary for a new wet pond? It didn't seem part of this application, or is that just a given in this case? That's just, I think, a question to staff.
So what I can tell you that I know, the application is submitted does not appear to propose any new pond area. Let's go with that. Now, the narrative says that they're not going to be modifying the 30-acre pond, but if you look at some of the exhibits, you'll notice that they basically baffled 30-acre pond into 3 chambers. At least that's what it shows. So their narrative says they're not going to make any modifications to the 30-acre pond, and then their exhibit shows these interior walls that are being installed in the 30-acre pond that create these 3 chambers. The 15-acre pond, as it is, gets reduced down to I can't remember what it's 8 or 6 acres. I can't remember, and kind of gets shifted over to the south and east of the 15-acre pond's current location. To the best, and based on the application, there aren't any other ponds that I can find. So the 15-acre pond becomes kind of a new, smaller pond. That may be what they're referring to. This is also the pond that's going to be collecting the leachate from the landfill. But then again, the 30-acre pond is going to be, it's going to have 3 chambers when they're done. So that may also be what's referenced as a new pond too. But I found nothing in there in the application indicating any new pond area. Yeah, that's it. That's the one. So
These are the 3 chambers right here, and then
Right.
here it's a proposed new wet pond.
yeah, that would be
And so my question,
yeah, that would be the remnant of the 15-acre pond. That new wet pond.
okay, so
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so that footprint is still within the old 15-acre pond. That's my question.
That's correct. Yes, it is. From what I can tell in the application, exhibit, yes. So yeah.
Okay, I would like that clarified by GP. I want to see, it appears to me in their material that is not the case. So I just want to make sure that it is, that they're not making another new place. And I mean, the 15-acre pond is probably full. I certainly didn't drive by, so I don't know, exactly what's what there. So anyways, those are my compatibility issues. I mean, addressing with the, is the fish, the river, and then, for the neighbors, making sure, that it works with what's there. I mean, this is AC land. It might be industrial use. It is AC land adjacent to residential land. So.
Good.
Judy?
Yeah, I've been going over all those materials and I studied them pretty carefully. The 15-acre pond is divided into 2 sections, one of which is the smaller leachate pond. So there's no new pond added. In fact, the pond is set further away from the river than it was before.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anyone have any other further questions to staff or in preparation for what comes next with GP? Okay. I just want to remind everybody that between now and the next hearing, we will ask the bias and ex parte contact question again. It's a long time between now and then, so you might run into people starting to ask you questions or have comments on it. So just be aware of that.
I am prepared.
All right. Staff, you have anything to add?
Hey, Jared, do you want to take just a moment then? Let's get back to the process then. What's like, because again, let's talk about the next steps, right? And what the law provides is, because we're gonna have this, we've continued it to January 11th. And at that point, right, Jerry, we're anticipating having you'll be opening the hearing back up, and you're going to, at that point, have a presentation. There may, I think, I'm going to guess, I'm just speculating here, you may very well have another supplementary written set of commentaries from GP in addition to what you have. I would be astonished if you didn't have something based on responding to what you've already asked tonight, and what they've seen in the staff report. In addition to that, we're expecting on the 11th to have a video presentation that will be run that night, hopefully answering some of your questions, that will be directed for you. And Jerry, right, so that'll be the night of the 11th, but at that point, we're not going to be deliberating that night because there'll be another window, right? Am I getting? Should we talk about that anymore, or would that be productive to?
That's fine. I think what we do that night will depend upon whether there's been a request to leave the record open again. But that brings us to this point. I think this evening we need a motion and a second from the commission here to leave the record open tonight for a period of 7 days to receive rebuttal testimony, responses to the questions you just posed, and any request to hold the record open beyond the initial 7-day period. So I think that motion needs to be made tonight to solidify the protocol.
Jerry, I'm confused on that point. Why would that happen now versus on the 11th?
Because right now,
The record is open now.
yeah. Well, to me, this clarifies what we're doing. We're leaving the record open for 7 days for those purposes. And do you, maybe Anna or John disagrees with that? I just thought that it made sense to me that it would be clear that tonight we would see the planning commission on its own volition can leave the record open. And to me, you say the record is open, but how long is it open for? You haven't made any motion. You haven't clarified anything. And we know that we're meeting.
Jerry, what's the effect of the continuance, though? I mean, is that in effect, though? I think that's what Andrew's asking.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I see. Because it's being continued, the argument
That
would be
motion's
that
been
we
made.
don't do that. I agree with you. I'll back up on that, and let's not do that. I think that will create some confusion. My fault. What I would like to say is, go ahead, is to go ahead and repeat and reemphasize what our chair has said, is that we will have a time period between now and the 11th. And we always decide these things on the record. It's not a matter of having the best information possible necessarily, because the information is provided to us. So we don't want to do independent research on these topics. We want to wait till these questions are answered. And we don't want to talk to the parties or do an unscheduled site visit. And I think that those are good things. And right, I would agree that I think that plan continues to January 11th.
So Jerry, and just to make sure I understand that too, then, so for, especially for people from the public that are listening to this, because the hearing has been continued, the record though is still available for them to, if someone hears this tonight and says tomorrow they want to write us a letter, there isn't anything stopping us from entering in that, or does that have to be like entered into the record the next time we meet? Or I think that's the only thing I think most people would want to. I'm not worried about the applicant. They're well represented. They're a sophisticated bunch. They've asked for the continuance. They're going to do their thing. I think we need to provide we need to make sure that people listening to this, other interested parties understand what, if they can provide, when's the best time for them to provide additional information?
So well, I think in some ways, go ahead.
I was just going to say,
what were you going to say, John?
Under the circumstances, if somebody submits something, like we got a letter today from some of the residents in the area. When we get it in, once I receive it, I can get it distributed to the planning commission via email, and within a very short period of time, I can get it posted to the website.
And it becomes part of the record.
It becomes part of the record. In this case, the record is kind of ethereal. It's it's on the website. It's very accessible. Anybody can get to it. Well, anybody can get to it on the website. It's very important if people, for whatever reason, can't get on the website, they can contact us, and we will find a way to make that material available to them, up into including. We'll figure out a way that they can come down here and inspect the record physically if they want to do that. So it's it kind of gets back to the the challenges of COVID and how this is kind of affecting our typical public hearing process. But as long as they can use a phone or email, they can contact us and they can get access to that record one way or the other. And in the meantime, anybody wants to submit something, if they submit it electronically, that's via email. As soon as we get it, we'll distribute it. And if they mail it, we'll scan it. It'll become electronic then. They can hand deliver it. We've got methods to address that as well. I think that kind of addresses it. I don't know, Jerry, what are your thoughts beyond that?
Yeah, I here's the thing. We don't, in the past, we've generally done leave the record open instead of continuances. We're doing continuances so that to the 11th. And what that really means is that people can submit whatever they want during that period up until the 11th. And then there'll be some issues about whether we need to hold the record open after that date. And so that was my fault. But basically, if a lot of things are submitted very late in the game, it may be difficult. It may just prolong the hearing. That's all I'm saying is that, so there would be some advantage, at least to the Planning Commission, to have these materials at a reasonable period of time. But, the thing is that this hearing will be continued until January 11th, and there'll be new material presented on the 11th, and there'll be the material that's already on the record and that is posted. That's what will happen.
And of course, the implications of that are, that's why you're unlikely, and I think categorically, you won't be making a decision on the 11th, because at that point, there'll be new evidence provided, and there's going to be, those are those follow-on periods where people can then, there's a point where other people get to respond, you hold the record open so they can respond to that, and we walk through that, of course, during the Jerry's description of this new process, which mirrors a lot of the way we used to do it in the past. There's some significant differences, but so the record's open right now because of the continuance. Anyone listening to this can submit additional information. It'll be made part of the hearing, and they should be prepared to participate. Anyone who wants to participate should be prepared to understand that the next major action will be taking place on January 11th. And at that point, we're going to be hearing from the applicant, and we'll be seeing what else they submit and what other people submit by the 11th. And of course, the purpose of this meeting was to make sure that we let the public know and we let the applicant know what was on your mind. And that's sort of what the new statute allows for and provides for, this back and forth. It almost feels like a written process because we're not meeting in person like we asked. So.
And one of the reasons why there won't be deliberation likely on the 11th is that under the statutory scheme, ORS 197-763, the applicant has the right to submit final written argument before you deliberate, unless that is waived. So that's part of the process. We don't know to what extent people will ask to leave the record open after January 11th, but we do know at a minimum that the applicant has the right to submit final written argument.
Which is why we're remaining a little indefinite, because there's things to come that could have a bearing on what the applicants or others choose to do in terms of leaving the record open.
Yep.
And that should feel familiar with just to some of our long-serving planning commissioners, is there's that kind of, but as we all know, there's a point where this ends after one or two more meetings, and they're going to have the last ability to have the last word based only on not introducing new information, but responding to what's already on the record. Right, Jerry? So.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So Judy's turned hers off, but Phil, you're back on. Did you have a question?
Okay, well, I just wanted to make sure that if it's noted that I will still have to go over to the dog park. So that's over in the vicinity of the ponds and the lagoons and everything.
I don't think that's a problem.
Okay.
Phil?
Yeah, I have a question on procedures for the meeting on the 11th. So there's gonna be proponents, which is GP, and maybe.
Not live, Phil, but with a already canned presentation.
Oh, okay. So what?
You're not gonna be able to ask them questions that night.
Oh, we can't.
They're not gonna be, right.
You
Okay.
can ask questions, but they're not gonna be.
What do the opponents do?
Well, I hope I said that correctly, because it's my understanding, Jerry, right, that and that's what's written, so Phil, that's what feels so different than the way we've done it traditionally. That's why it almost feels like a correspondence course, like you're mailing each other stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And although what is exactly the same at the end of the most critical point, your deliberation is going to be done in this format with all of you asking each other and reasoning with each other and trying to arrive at some kind of positions. Of course, that's going to be very much, that's going to feel like this right now, and it's going to be open and robust, and everyone can watch it. But yeah, that's go ahead.
So we won't be able to ask GP any questions on the 11th.
I think that's the implications of it. Yeah, there's gonna be a canned presentation. That's one of the reasons we're doing this now. The questions. I think they asked for a continuance because they wanted to see what else they saw a bunch of stuff in the staff report. They're gonna have the benefit of all of the questions that you've asked, so they have a lot more understanding now about where you're coming from, having looked at the application. And so I think, go ahead.
So after their presentation, we still can ask questions. There might not be a live person there to answer them, but our questions then go to them. And then part of this 7-day back and forth little slop thing that we're gonna be figuring out, that is when they will answer them. And also then when opponents or proponents, other people, can also ask their questions. It's not an interactive thing, but those windows come back open briefly for those questions to come in. And then GP will come back and either reply or not to our questions before we have the opportunity to deliberate. I believe that is how, in layman's terms.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right, isn't it? Yeah. Nicely
Yeah,
done.
you could ask additional questions. The only thing I would say to the planning commission, that in time, we need to move this along because we are under a 150-day period, which has been extended, but basically there is a time limit to get everything through. So you need to do your job, but we need to move it along as well. And, but if you have questions the next time, you can still ask questions, but there won't be live parties here. It'll have to be relayed just as you did today.
Is that okay, Phil? Do you understand?
It doesn't sound legal to me.
Well, let's go over.
But I guess I'm not a legalese, so.
Before Jerry provides his explanation, let me provide my explanation, Phil, which goes like this. Under normal circumstances, you're darn right, this would not be legal. But with COVID, the legislature created this special, at least temporary approach for these extraordinary circumstances. And I imagine as soon as COVID is no longer dominating our lives like this, we'll be back at our normal process. But the only reason we're doing it this way is that the legislature, and we're strictly following that path that the legislature has set forward. But if it feels different and feels illegal, it's certainly different than what you're used to. Hell yeah. Yeah, no, this is a different critter. And and if it doesn't feel different, then you're not paying attention. So I'm glad you got to the point where you said, wait a minute, that doesn't feel right. Is that legal? It's only legal now because the legislature had to stitch together this alternative process.
So House Bill 4212 allows for this type of process. And the thing is, it's legal until the COVID era is passed, until those declarations are, gone and so on. There's some statutory language on that, but House Bill 4212 allows for this type of a hearing. Now, land use has its own creature, its own whatever. And the main thing is that we be fair. We don't do ex parte contacts. We give everybody a right to respond. It may be in writing, but the law recognizes it can be in writing. We don't want it in person because so many people are getting COVID. It's very unhealthy. And so we're doing the best that we can.
Okay. I see two people open again. Do you have, Scarlett and Shaylin, do you have questions?
Yeah, I've got, go ahead.
Real quick, when Judy makes me think about this, and I'm well aware of the situation, but my mother lives out by this area. So when Judy's discussing, excuse me, driving over the bridge for the dog park, et cetera, put it on the record that I drive over there for my mom. I take the dogs, but yeah, I'm familiar with the landfill, and I'll be out in that general vicinity for Thanksgiving. So I do see where the landfill is, but as you cross the bridge, my mother lives directly to the right on Skelton Road. Do I feel like I can perform my duties with an open mind? Yes, very much so.
Okay, thank you. Shaylin?
Question for Michael. I think Jerry, excuse me. I think the area that I have confusion about is when, let's say, someone's watching us today and they've listened and they've got questions. They're talking about the general public's questions. And they write, hopefully, I don't think you're accepting phone call comments, but that has not been addressed, so I don't know. But the other thing has to do with, all right, they send in a letter and it's posted to the record, and the Georgia Pacific answers it after our January 11th meeting. Is there any kind of way for people to have any kind of back and forth? Is that what's really been pulled apart?
Yeah, the law allows for, if there's new information provided, that contact you outside of the record, just, indicate that you can't talk to them. In terms of those people who are in the vicinity of the, need to be in the vicinity because some relative lives by the subject property or something, just don't go out of your way to do an inspection. And if you feel like, you've taken in some information or something, then just announce it. Remember, an ex parte contact or something in the nature of a field visit in and of itself doesn't render a decision null and void. It is simply a matter of you announce it. And if somebody has some questions about it, they can address it in the written material. I
was thinking more in lines of, okay, we have our meeting on the 11th. We know we're going to have at least one more meeting after that. What about questions that arise between the 11th and the next meeting and the presentation of their final presentation to the board? It feels like it could go on and on.
Well, it can.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
It can go on. There is some possibility when we can try to control that, but it could go on a couple of rounds at least. So
okay, that's what I was.
Jerry, and this is the case. This is not very different than the normal path, which is there is a point where, where the public is done having their say, and then the applicant gets that last argument, and then it goes to you in rebuttal. I'm sorry, it goes to you into deliberation. And
Yes.
at that point, people can just stand, including the applicant, they just stand back and watch you do your thing. And so in terms of, does this feel anti-democratic? In some ways, I don't think very much, because in terms of little d democratic, because of public participation, because as a practical matter, if you care about this issue, or if you care about land use issues in your area, unless you get direct notice from something that's, because you're within the notice area, it begs the question, how do most people in Lincoln County decide to weigh in on things that you guys do? And to a certain extent, we rely on the media or word of mouth, or it's not like we put ads out in the community saying, hey, we've got an interesting application, why don't you engage? So that it's all about citizens and residents in this community, and the people that care about their community have to be tracking to a certain extent what we do. We can't go out. So I think at the end of the day, while someone might have wanted their grand moment to stand up in a hearing room and either support GP 100% or say this is the worst idea that I've ever heard, they're going to have to do that in writing, or they're going to have to do that they don't get to do that at that moment in person. That's really the difference. So I think, and I'm really interested when this whole process is over, how people respond to this new process. Do they like it? I think there's some advantages too of us having this being recorded and being live. I think in some cases this might have enhanced our ability for the public to track what we're doing compared to the old process. So it's probably a mixed bag, but I'm glad you asked the question, and I'm glad you're concerned about that how are people going to react to this? And it's an interesting question.
Okay then, I'm seeing no more questions right now, but you are all free to contact staff through the 11th. That's the one place where you can ask questions. If you have anything that came up or you finished going through all the cross sections and maps and chemicals and things like that. So that's who you can ask questions to in the meantime. With that, are there any other planning commission concerns?
Andra, this is Casey from Behind the Curtain. And
Yes, hi Casey.
You did mention at the beginning of this meeting that what if people ask questions or type into comments? And so I've checked that and realized we had one listener type in some inquiries. And then what that made me do is kind of look on the Planning Commission webpage, and I realized we don't have a real obvious pathway for that public input. So I think one of the things that needs to be done is, real bold letters for input. This is the pathway to get that to us. And staff can take a look at the commissioner's web pages as well. We really have that in big, bold print. Here's where you submit your input. So there's nothing online right now. I will tell the person in the comments section that we'll be posting that information. And just wanted to let you guys know. So thank you.
Casey, in addition to that, to anyone within the sound of my voice, I would say contact the planning department. Give us a call too. If you got questions about how to input this process, we're here to help, and we want the input.
Great, thank you.
I would say that they can make comments on the YouTube, can't they?
Well, that is what Casey's talking about. He's monitoring the YouTube, and that's since we're not seeing that. But as you recall, in a normal hearing process, the audience, we are not taking comments from the audience at this stage of the hearing process. If they want to submit material, there's a process for doing that that Casey's trying to formalize and make it more direct right into the planning on the planning department page. I think that maybe the staff needs to discuss about, and Jerry, about the YouTube comments, if that becomes part of the records at some point or something, but
Yeah.
I don't want to venture into that right now. I don't know if we have an answer to that.
You know, Andrew, it was a very interesting point that you just made. At where we're at now in our process, there wouldn't have been public commentary at this point anyway. It would have followed as this new process is. It would have followed the first presentation. It would have been part of either the applicant would have made their oral presentation in front of us, and then we would have opened it up to, as you all know, or many of you know, we would have opened it up to opponents and supporters of the application. So we're even at this stage right now, we're not at a point in a normal situation where we would have been taking that public testimony anyway.
Correct.
If people are feeling deprived that I haven't been able to, sit there and give my 2 cents, is like, under a normal circumstance, you wouldn't have had that opportunity at this stage either. But they're there later, and they're there to submit information, and we welcome comments.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Any other planning commission concerns?
I just have one piece of good news that I want to actually planning commission concerns. Oops. But the staff, I just want to announce that we've hired a new planner. Her name is Megan Hoff, and she'll be starting in January. Very excited about that.
Great. Terrific. Looking forward to meeting her. All right. With that, I think we're ready to adjourn. So that's it for tonight. We'll see you all January 11th.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Yes, everybody.
Stay safe. Stay safe, everybody.
All right.